Section 1.4 and 1.5, these are the sections that we get into adding and subtracting real numbers. Well, what this means is we are going to begin adding sign rules in our addition and subtraction. So the main thing you have to remember is when you have the same sign, you add and keep the sign. If you have different signs, subtract, take the sign of the larger number. Now, look, see if I have a highlighter so I can highlight that. I do not, but these two are your sign rules for adding and subtracting. So the same sign makes you add and keep the sign. Different signs, subtract, take the sign of the bigger number. Well, what does it mean to have the same sign? If you have the same sign, you can have two positives. So if you do have two positives, like 4 plus 5, you just add and you'll have a positive 9. If you have two negatives, see this is a -3 and a -7. If I have two negatives, that's the same sign. I'm going to add 7 plus 3 is 10 and keep the sign. So I'm going to have a -10. So this is what it means to have the same sign. You add the numbers and keep the sign. If you have different signs, one negative and one positive, so I have a -3 and a positive 5. So I'm going to subtract. What's 5 minus 3? Well, that's 2. The bigger number is positive, so my answer will be positive. If you have different signs, subtract and take the sign of the larger number. The larger number was positive, so my answer is positive. For this one, I have a -8 and a positive 4. Different signs, so I'm going to subtract. 8 minus 4 is 4. The bigger number is negative, so my answer is negative. So this is how sign rules work. And so if I do not have a saying or anything like that, and a lot of students get bogged down on how do I remember my sign rules. The answer is practice. The more homework that you work, the easier these rules will come, and it's really important that you learn these rules. So I'm just going to say practice. The next thing that we have on this little sheet is make sure that each number you have only has one sign in front of it. By definition, subtraction means adding the opposite of a number. So if you have something like this that has 6 plus a -2, that's the same thing as writing 6 minus 2. Okay? If you have something like this that says 6 minus a -2, a double negative actually makes a positive. So anytime you see a double negative, that means that you have the opposite of -2, which is positive 2. Now, you don't have to think of it that hard. Every time you see a double negative, just know that you're going to make that a positive. So what I do is I always make sure that I have my double negatives taken out first before I begin my adding or subtracting. And if you do have something that looks like this, you don't want to ever write that in your homework as plus negative. You always want to go ahead and write it as a minus, or your course compass homework will actually count it wrong. So if you do have to ever write anything, never write plus negative, always write just minus. Just keep that in mind for later. All right, so let's look. Double negatives of in the front will always change to a positive. So this double -3 will actually be a positive 3. This plus -4 is the same thing as just 5, sorry. Plus -5 will be the same thing as -5. And then a negative like this with nothing in between with a 6 is just -6. These are only one signs, and this is the double negative signs. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some rules. So again, same sign, you're going to add and keep the sign. When you have different signs, you're going to subtract, take the sign of the larger number. So let's go ahead and see if we can work the first 5 together. So I have -7 plus a -2. These are the same signs. I have negatives on both of them, so I'm going to add 7 plus 2 is 9 and keep the sign. Now on number 2, notice that I have a double negative. I want to rewrite that. So I'm going to say 10, and my double negative is the same thing as a plus. So 10 plus 3. Same sign. I have both positives, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. It'll be a positive 13. All right, number 3, I have a -2 and a -4. Now, a lot of my students do not notice that this minus is the same thing as -4, okay? It is. If you have a minus in front, That's the same thing as a negative. So remember, if you have a double negative, it changes to a positive. So this is a -2 and a -4. This is the same sign. So I'm going to add 2 plus 4 is 6, and I'm going to keep the sign. Remember, if you have the same sign, you're going to add and keep the sign. So I had the same sign. I'm going to add and keep the sign and get -6. Now number 4, I have more numbers. So I'm only going to look at 2 of them at a time. I had a -3 and a -4, the same sign, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. They're negative, so I'm going to keep that negative. Then I want to bring down this -6. I have a -7 and a -6, the same sign, so I'm going to add 7 plus 6 is 13 and keep that sign. So my answer is -13. Okay, that one was a little harder. Let's go ahead and look at number 5. Again, number 5 has more than 2, so I'm going to take 2 at a time. I have a -8 and a -4. Same sign, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. The sign's negative because it's the same sign. Bring down this -1. Again, we have a -12 and a -1. Same sign, I'm going to add and keep the sign. So I have a -13 as my answer. All right, and we'll be back for the next part in a second.